Welcome to Cultivated Live for Wednesday, March 27th. That sounds like it should be
27.
earlier in the month. I don't know. It sounds like it's late in the year already. I'm Jay Rosenthal. You are Jeremy Berke. We are the co-founders of Cultivated Media. You are our editor-in-chief. I am the host of this program, Cultivated Live. And since we both launched Cultivated, our goal has been to be, let's call it industry first, providing the people and the companies that work in the industry important, insightful, and useful information to our audience. We do that in two key ways. One, through our daily newsletter. You can find it at cultivated.news, and through our daily live stream here on LinkedIn and on YouTube. Oh yeah, you're repping the website.
I am.
I love it. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you, Jay. It's always a pleasure to be here.
I love Wednesdays because we get to chit chat about what is in not only today's newsletter, but the news in general. Are you ready to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it because we don't do enough chit chatting not on Wednesday. So
it's like basically doing what we do, but doing it through a live stream. But let's get to it because I mean, almost every day now there's something political. Today, there's a write-up in Los Angeles Times that cannabis and talking cannabis on the presidential campaign trail is actually really part of the game plan and to attract young people. There was a stat that you put in today's newsletter. Only about 30% of 18 to 29-year-olds view Biden favorably. Ouch. That's according to recent polls. And a recent Gallup poll, nearly 80%, not a typo, of 18 to 34-year-olds want cannabis legalized. That is a huge number, which I know is why it's playing into almost every conversation in Washington right now. But even those numbers seem both low of 18 to 29-year-olds, but also very high of a similar cohort who want cannabis legalized. This is clearly what's driving the news, yeah?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've been beating the drum, so to speak, on the story for a long time. But I want to set the stage even outside of the numbers, right? Like Biden is 81 years old. He was a drug warrior 30 years ago, right? So despite the fact that things are moving slowly, I think the shift that we're seeing from Biden is pretty incredible to watch in real time, right? And just to go into that, he mentioned it at the State of the Union. That's the biggest bully pulpit that a president can really command outside of debates, basically. The vice president hosted a roundtable in the Roosevelt room, which, as we've said on this live stream before, the symbolism should not be lost on me or anyone else that they're talking about cannabis in that very room. And third, you have senior Democrats, obviously with Biden's blessing, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who are going out there and saying, we want cannabis reform. This is our top legislative priority, right? So when you put all those breadcrumbs together, you have a huge shift from Biden, and you also have the sort of obvious nature of him trying to go after young voters. This is going to be a contested election, even though it's a rematch. And, we will see, but I do believe that things are real this time. Will the end result be something that everyone from the industry to advocates are happy with? Probably not, but it will be a big shift. And I think we are about to see something pretty soon. But don't hold me to that because it's politics.
It came up yesterday when we were with Brad as well on this program. And it seems like even throughout Biden's administration and the current and past Congress, recent ones, like it seemed like many stars were aligned on cannabis reform, right? There was, pushes for safe banking, rescheduling, is actually relatively new, but there was conversation here and there, in lame duck sessions, it was like urgent, but there were some that wanted, to include some more social equity provisions or more for the industry. Like there were lots of things swirling, but it seems that the political landscape and the policy landscape seem to be aligned very closely right now, and those numbers pointed out. And I don't. It's not lost on me that someone of Biden's generation of legislators in Washington have moved so far, and really, it seems slow, but so fast on an issue like this that they're actually not just doing it begrudgingly now, but actually talking about it as one of the core tenets coming out of a State of the Union and right directly onto the campaign trail. I don't think it's lost. It's certainly not lost on me. It's not lost on you, but it shouldn't be lost on the industry either, that while we think things are moving slowly or not enough, they are actually as the general public looks at it, they are moving quickly and a lot, I think.
Yeah, and look, not to use a stupid cliche, but I think where there's smoke, there's going to be a lot of fire, right? And so I think that's what we're seeing right now. And at the end of the day, election year presidents are absolutely political creatures, and the numbers you laid out, I mean, 80% of young people, 18 to 34, support legalization. around 30% support Biden. There's an obvious ground for him to make up here. And I think this is an issue that he could do it. And, we added a quote that was given to the LA Times from a pollster from Biden's 2020 campaign, excuse me. She says, what's good about this issue is it's clean and it's clear and it cuts through. I mean, that's about as good a quote you get from a pollster on any single issue you can find. So, the drumbeat continues.
Well, I want to take that quote, those numbers, and place them into a specific context in Florida, where this week we're gonna, I think tomorrow. I'm not as familiar with the workings of the Florida State Supreme Court,
Yes.
but it seems like tomorrow we could find out if the ballot measure to legalize adult use will be on the ballot in November, and like as clear a cut as Celinda Lake mentioned, the pollster around cannabis, like that as well is abortion rights, and both of those measures may be on the ballot in Florida in November. And it seems to me, while Florida has been very red of late, like it may put Florida in play for Democrats or some Democrats or statewide Democrats down there to have these things on the same ballot at the same time in a presidential election. And we talked about this, I think, for the past month or so, that, certainly cannabis can move voters, but cannabis plus abortion, we've seen it in Ohio. Things can move pretty dramatically when other things are adjacent to presidential elections on the ballot. Like, how are you thinking about what may happen in Florida, which we may know about this week?
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't want to go on record prognosticating about whether Florida will go blue, so I will table that discussion. But look, I think the point is a good one. Two things I'll say about Florida is one is the legalization campaign there is it's a corporate-led campaign, right? And so these are folks who aren't really the core Democratic base, and I sort of say that not so lightly because it's companies like Trulieve that are running the campaign. These are people who are sort of intimately linked to Florida's Republican Party. And the bill itself, the way it's written, it definitely favors large corporations over, the kind of wish list that social equity advocates like to see when they look at legalization. I think the second thing, right, talking about tea leaves or drumbeats or whatever you want to say, we've seen deals pick up in Florida, right, from connected, plugged in folks. And I think that is a huge signal to me, right? AFC Gamma, they're lending $34 million to Sunbird Cannabis. Sunbird Cannabis is run by Brady Cobb. He is very well networked within Florida and he knows what's going on. He would not borrow that money if he didn't have good insight into what's going on. Air Wellness, another Florida cannabis company, they're upsizing a mortgage. Their CFO gave a quote in the press release saying, look, like, we're bullish on Florida. We're going to invest in its business. Like, that's not an accident. It's coming out 48 hours before this Thursday deadline. And so, look, like, reading those tea leaves, putting it together, I think as well with the abortion piece you mentioned, like, it's looking pretty good for Florida. That being said, I'm the furthest thing from a pollster, and I don't want to say like it's going to be a blue wave in Florida. I have no idea, but cannabis and abortion are pretty popular and seem to be pretty popular among Floridians.
Yeah, especially among younger voters who, turning out in Florida could sway some things. And it is,
Yeah.
I mean, the other part, which we, I think, wrote about yesterday in Tuesday's newsletter, which is, and actually in previous weeks as well, is that opposition is also coalescing, certainly in Washington, right? I think it was the House Republican Policy Committee, gave some ammunition to some of its members about how to oppose this and do it based on policy. We saw Bill Barr similarly in a piece.
Yeah.
Saying that legalization was a mistake, or all those things. Now, whether that sways a lot of Republicans in Congress, they see the same polls that we just talked about, that this is wildly popular, certainly among young people. But everybody overall, 70% of people want cannabis legalized. Even more percent, I think, the American Bankers Association put out a poll that even people understand the banking challenges. Voters understand the banking challenges for the cannabis industry. So while there is also coalescing opposition around it, that opposition, I think, gets smaller and smaller, even though their voices are loud. But they may not be resonating with members who actually have to go to the ballot box in November and get in front of voters.
Yeah. Look, and to that point, like, I'm not sure how much Bill Barr actually cares about the issue. I think, reading his editorial in the Free Press, there's a lot of easy holes to poke. And look, like, I may not agree with him politically, but he's not a stupid guy. And so, if what he wrote is so kind of thinly sourced, easy to pick apart, it means he probably wasn't looking at the issue too deeply, right? The second thing on the Safer Banking Act, particularly, is look, like again, it's not what advocates want. It is so far from legalization, but it is what is politically feasible for Republicans right now. And specifically, not even about cannabis, but about the Section 10 issues within the bill, which basically is a roundabout way of getting the federal government out of telling banks what they can and can't bank. So it applies to pornography, guns, and other sort of vice or sin industries, whatever you want to say. That is something that Republicans like, and that's something that is going to be a political winner. And so, look, like, if we can believe Mr. Chuck Schumer, who's been saying this for years and years and years now. So, look, like, again, I don't know, but if we can believe him, look, I think they can get this bill passed. I think rescheduling reform will come soon. And once you have rescheduling reform, once you have banking protections, the DOJ has to say something, and they have to sort of rule and create a memo about how the federal government's going to treat this. With those three pieces in play, right, you have a version of legalization that I believe isn't perfect. No one really wants, but it will change everything for the industry at the same time.
I want to ask you because I think you're not saying this, but I think some believe that this is like fait accompli. Like these things are happening; they're going to happen quickly. They're likely to happen this year. I wonder how closely everybody's coordinating in Washington, where they like it's great if it happens in March. It's probably better if it happens in April or maybe even a little bit later, closer to the election. You don't want it to happen over the summer. Like, do you think? And we're not Washington people, but like
Yeah.
how like do you think that's part of the conversation? Like yesterday, Brad suggested like will rescheduling happen the week of 420 just to make it a little cheeky, right? Like, do you think that's part of it, or is it like this is just the pace of things in Washington?
You know, I would say it's more the latter than the former. At the same time, these sort of things aren't lost on politicians, right? It's just a matter of Congress being a bit ineffectual and them not being able to coordinate on anything, let alone a complex multi-agency, multi-stage legalization process or rescheduling process. So, look, I think my interpretation and my understanding is a little bit dimmer, maybe than Brad's in Washington, but at the same time, uh, I don't think it's out of the picture that they're looking at 420 to do something and to make some noise and also to put some wind in Democrat sails, right? I think that's not lost on them. Like they're reading these polling numbers, they're political animals, they are seeing this and they want to do something about this.
I used to live and work in DC, and at the time, if you smoked pot, you were like you had to really, really hide it. This was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
It was really even among Democrats, and the only Democrats that I found sort of like mine with were the ones from California who didn't care at all. But even if it is a very conservative town, and I mean that in
Yes.
like everybody wears a suit type of conservative, right? Like it's not very laid back. I know that that's changed, and there's actually a lot of cannabis in DC now,
Yeah.
but it is but that is the culture from which many of these people live and work, I guess. Yeah.
Look, I mean that was my point earlier, right? Is like this is I don't have the same DC experience you do. I go down there, I report pretty frequently, but I haven't lived there, right? But I think the sea change that we're seeing here, the fact that it's mentioned, the fact that 80-year-olds in Congress even know what 420 is. I think like we can't lose that, right? We can't lose sight of these things. And again, it's not what everyone wants. It's not perfect, but that's democracy. It's messy. It's slow, but that's the system that we have in America, and that's what they designed. And I think the legalization process is exactly an encapsulation of all of that.
Yeah. DC is very. Do you follow this guy on Instagram? I think his name is Tony P in DC. He's like this 25-year-old bat. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Like that's the
Me and my
guy in
friends make fun
DC.
of
Like
him, but
he doesn't work in politics, but that's the guy that's like every guy in DC. Like, you know, if it's not a suit, it's like it's a jacket and pants. Like it's like that's the DC corporate guy and political guy. That's the guy that I think
That's
about
close enough.
working on the Hill. Right? Like anyway, Jeremy, with that, I want to if this program gets to Tony P, that is really something. But I want to thank you for making time this morning. That's it for Cultivated Live. We'll see you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern. I'll be back with Krista Raymer. She's from Vitrina Group. They're the foremost cannabis retail consultancies. I'm going to ask her about a post they just made about how to deal with in-store, basically like bad returns in retail, but specific to cannabis. And anybody that has ever bought a like 510 vape cartridge, like they all leak? I want to ask that specific question. What are you supposed to do when you bring them back and they leak? And how are frontline staff supposed to deal with that? So we'll ask Krista that tomorrow. Jeremy, again, thank you. We'll see everybody here tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern, right here on LinkedIn, YouTube. Smash the subscribe button. Subscribe to our newsletter at cultivated.news. And buy cannabis at your local dispensary, Jeremy. The legal ones in New York, head in there, or any bodega down the street.
The legal ones.
The legal ones. Oh, yeah. Don't buy it at a bodega, anybody. At least the people that listen to this show. Jeremy, thanks so much. We'll connect with you next week.
Okay. Thank you.